At the beginning of the story, we meet a young man named Soma. Apparently an extremely studious young man living in modern Japan with his grandfather. He always tries to act logically and realistically when making plans. He spends much of his time in the library, immersed in his studies, without much social interaction. One ordinary day, while searching for a book on a shelf, an intense light appeared above him. Confused by what was happening, he didn't have time to react before being sucked into the light, and, the next moment, falling from the sky into a completely unknown land. The fear of dying from the fall was immediate, but to his surprise, he landed gently on the ground, unharmed. Still stunned, Soma realized he was surrounded by several hooded figures watching him intently. This made him apprehensive, but he tried to maintain his composure and appear in control. These figures led him to a place that, to him, resembled a courthouse. There were people wearing ancient costumes, some of whom didn't even appear fully human, possessing animal features. On the throne, a king welcomed him warmly, calling him a hero and thanking him for answering the call. Soma, however, was irritated, as he had not answered any call and felt he had been forcibly brought to this place. The king asked him not to be angry and promised to explain the situation. He said that this world was inhabited by wizards, magicians, dwarves, elves, knights, and dragons, but that some time ago, a small void opened up in the north of the continent, and from there, an endless horde of demons began to emerge. The neighboring kingdoms united to fight them. But no matter how many enemies they slew, others always immediately emerged. The kingdom lacked infinite human resources and was losing strength. Soma declared he would not fight demons. A minister then explained that the biggest problem came from the Empire of Chaos, the most powerful of all, which constantly demanded financial support. Since the kingdom had no money, the empire threatened to declare war. The solution the king and his advisors came up with was to summon a hero and deliver him to the empire to avoid payment. Soma was shocked to realize this was the reason he had been summoned. He asked if they knew what would happen to him once he was delivered, and received only vague answers, leading him to conclude that he could not rely on luck. He asked about the last time a hero had been summoned and heard that it had happened 500 years ago, with no one having been able to repeat the feat since. Soma then pointed out that if he were handed over, the kingdom would have no other hero to offer in the future, and this argument left everyone silent. Seizing the moment, he presented himself as the hero who would lead the kingdom to a revolution and promised to reorganize the finances to avoid ruin. For 3 days and 3 nights, he and the king analyzed all the financial records. In the end, Soma had some ideas for reviving the economy. The next day, before a crowd, the king declared Soma more fit to rule and transferred the crown to him. Soma's shock deepened when the king announced that his only daughter, Liz, would be betrothed to him to reinforce his legitimacy on the throne. In a matter of moments, Soma's life changed completely, and he became responsible for the fate of the entire kingdom. Soma locked himself in the royal chambers, immersed in a pile of documents, working tirelessly. He was interrupted when the door opened and a beautiful young woman in military uniform entered without saying anything. Too tired to look away from his work, he asked if she could read and write. Liz firmly replied that she was educated, and after answering a few math questions correctly, she was invited to help him with the paperwork. As she approached, she introduced herself as the daughter of the former king, which made Soma finally look up and ask why she was in military garb. Liz explained that she had always had a vocation for combat and wanted to serve on the front lines. Curious, Liz wanted to know what had happened to her father, as she didn't believe he would resign voluntarily. Soma sighed and explained that he had been brought to that world against his will, that his initial intention was only to avoid being handed over to the Empire of Chaos, and that her father was impressed and eventually passed the crown to him. He reinforced that he didn't intend to remain on the throne forever, but would stay for 2 or 3 years until he had financially stabilized the kingdom, and then return to his own world. He also told her not to worry about the engagement, as she could cancel it whenever she wanted. Liz was impressed by Soma's humble attitude and began to speak to him more cordially. He explained that he was already working to increase the kingdom's resources and that he had sold all the useless jewels and treasures in the royal vault, as the country currently needed food to feed its people, not ornaments locked away in a warehouse. Liz was horrified and claimed that many of those objects were priceless ancient artifacts. Soma calmed her by showing her a list of items he had set aside, explaining that he had not sold any national heritage or objects related to dark magic, only simple gold and silver jewelry. Liz was reassured and asked what his next plans were. Soma replied that he had no intention of sending money to the Empire of Chaos at this time, as the kingdom's inhabitants were still starving and in need of food. Liz suggested that, instead of sending the resources directly to the empire, they could use them to strengthen their own military forces. Soma reflected and acknowledged her point, realizing that if they gave the empire money, it would continue to demand more, but if they invested in their own defense, perhaps they could resist and regain their lost position. Gradually, Soma began to better understand how that world worked. He made an extensive inspection of the kingdom and discovered several hidden properties and resources he had never known. At first glance, the place seemed very old-fashioned and lacking modern techniques or tools, but upon closer inspection, he realized there were several contemporary comforts adapted in other ways. For example, there was no electricity or familiar lamps, but every street had street lights, and the houses remained lit at night. This was due to the special magic the inhabitants of that continent possessed, capable of creating light, heat, and water on demand, something extremely useful. On one of these visits, a priest took him to a strange statue and asked him to place his hand on it, saying that this would determine if he had magical affinity. As he did so, Soma felt himself suddenly transported to a darkness filled with glowing dots, realizing it was the work of magic. When he came to, the priest confirmed his affinity and recommended training to hone his ability. Soma returned to his quarters, where he had hired literate people to help with the volume of documents. Before beginning the work, he decided to test his powers and managed to transfer his consciousness into 3 quills, which began to write on their own. He tried the same with a 4th, but it didn't work, realizing that this was his current limit. While he was working, Liz came in to check on him and was surprised by the enchanted quills. She commented that she had never seen that kind of magic, and Soma replied that he had just created it. Without allowing any further questions, he handed her a stack of documents to review. They worked for hours until, exhausted, Soma realized everyone had fallen asleep. He approached Liz, who was sleeping on the couch, and studied her face for a moment before gently brushing away a few strands of hair. She woke suddenly and asked what he was doing, and he explained that he was just checking to see if she was asleep. The next morning, Soma said he wanted to show her something, and they mounted a horse. To Liz's surprise, he chose to sit behind her, holding tightly to her waist, as he didn't know how to ride. They had a pleasant ride until they reached a vast field covered in white. As they walked together, Soma explained that this was just one example of the countless cotton plantations scattered throughout the country, now practically useless. He explained that, in the past, cotton was a highly valued crop, and so all farmers began to cultivate it on a large scale, neglecting other crops. At the time, the strategy seemed sound, as the profits from exports would allow them to import food, but other countries also began producing cotton, causing supply to increase and demand to fall. This caused a sharp drop in prices and rendered cotton worthless, plunging the kingdom into a severe food shortage. Liz was saddened to realize that, even though she was one of the military leaders, she was unaware of this crisis. He apologized, but Soma said there was no reason to apologize, only to help him restore the kingdom. Back at the castle, during breakfast, they were approached by Ark, who introduced himself as the leader of the guard. He asked if there was anything he could help with, and Soma bluntly replied that he needed more qualified and trained people, as most of them couldn't perform their duties properly. Ark promised to look into what could be done and left. Later, over tea, Soma had an idea and asked Liz if there was some kind of message-transmitting device. She didn't understand right away, but upon hearing the description, she remembered there was a public announcement device. Soma saw this as the perfect opportunity for his plan and asked her to take him to the location. He explained that he intended to recruit workers directly from the population. Liz pointed out that this was already done and explained that the process consisted of a series of written exams, and only those who passed all of them were hired. Soma asserted that this strategy was ineffective, as it failed to take advantage of talented people who were illiterate. He then asked what the literacy rate was in the kingdom, and Liz replied that it was around 30%. Soma looked at Liz and asserted that written exams could not reveal a person's true talent, as what mattered was aptitude, not literacy. He explained that this set of tests must have been influenced by high-ranking nobles, who had the resources and connections to send their children to the best academies, guaranteeing them education and positions of power at court. To him, this was a classic example of nepotism. Liz was surprised by this revelation and demanded to know what he intended to do, but Soma replied only that she would find out soon. The next day, he stood before the broadcasting device next to Liz and began an address to the entire kingdom. Soma addressed his subjects, telling them that he was offering them a great opportunity to completely change their lives, capturing everyone's attention. He announced that he would open a selection process for individuals with high aptitude, specializations, or any useful skill emphasizing that nothing else mattered, whether the person was literate or illiterate, rich or poor. What would count would be each person's skills, strength, and ability. On the day of the selection, the throne room filled to watch the king choose the new recruits. Soma sat on the throne with Liz at his side, and Ark introduced the candidates. To everyone's surprise, only 5 people signed up. Everyone bowed before the king, except for a tall, dark-skinned young woman named Aisha, who declared that she belonged to the warrior elf clan, and that she would not bow to anyone to whom she had not sworn loyalty. Ark became irritated and ordered her to bow, but Soma interrupted him and asked him to let her pass. Soma quickly used his special magic to research the warrior elves and discovered that they were known and feared for their combat prowess. Being excellent fighters, Aisha claimed to be one of the finest warriors in her clan, which made her likely one of the best in the kingdom. She then asked if Soma could help her. He was surprised, but the young woman explained that the sacred forest where they lived was rapidly deteriorating for no apparent reason. She assured him that everyone in the clan took excellent care of the place, but still, the forest seemed to be dying. She added that she had heard of Soma's intelligence and believed he could devise a strategy to save it. Soma, still confused, asked if they practiced thinning the trees. Uncomprehending, Aisha asked him to explain, and he explained that when a forest is allowed to grow freely, the older trees end up blocking sunlight in the canopy, preventing seedlings and saplings from receiving enough light to grow. Over time, the soil becomes barren, with no young plants to replace the fallen trees, making the land more vulnerable to erosion and other serious natural problems. Upon hearing this, Aisha knelt before him and pledged her life to Soma, asking to become his bodyguard and requesting his help in restoring the forest. Soma accepted the request. The next candidate was Juna, an extremely beautiful young woman known as the finest singer in the kingdom. The minister explained that she was descended from a line of mermaids who, in the past, enchanted sailors with their voices and caused them to be lost at sea. Soma thought that if this were true, singing would be in her blood. He then asked her to sing a song live for the entire kingdom. Juna replied that she didn't mind, but warned that most of her songs were sad. He asked if she could memorize a song just by listening to it once, and Juna said yes. Soma took his cell phone out of his pocket and gave her a pair of headphones with a song. She listened, approved, and returned the headphones, while everyone watched the strange object curiously. Then she sang perfectly, moving the audience. Soma praised her skill and her ability to memorize and perform the song flawlessly. The next to perform was Poncho, a portly, nervous man who was sweating profusely. As he tried to approach the king, he tripped and fell, but quickly got up. He explained that his talent lay in being a great foodie and that he had tried almost every dish in the country. He expected Soma to laugh, but to everyone's surprise, the king stepped down from his throne to shake his hand, and said he was looking for someone like him. He explained that in times of famine, the ability to recognize and identify food could be extremely valuable. This excited Poncho, who was moved to tears when he said he had always been the butt of jokes because of his weight. Soma assured him he would play a key role in restoring the kingdom's prosperity. Next, Kaz introduced himself, a serious and observant man who claimed to have been evaluating Soma throughout the selection process. Kaz was known as one of the kingdom's most brilliant minds and an avid reader of all literature. When asked for his opinion, he replied that Soma's decision to value Poncho showed he had discernment and knew what the kingdom needed at the time. Impressed, Kaz asked to become the king's lieutenant and personal advisor, and Soma accepted. The final candidate was Tomo, a young woman from the wolf clan who could communicate with all animals. Frightened and withdrawn, she could barely speak. Liz commented that members of her race were rarely seen in the kingdom, and Soma suggested she might be a refugee. When he asked her to speak, he noticed Tomo's nervousness grew even more intense. He stepped down from his throne, knelt before her, and asked what was wrong. The young woman whispered something in his ear, momentarily shocking him. Quickly recovering, he acted as if nothing had happened, stood up, and declared that the selection was over, but that he would like to speak with Tomo in private. Later, in Soma's room, Tomo, Liz, Ark, and the minister gathered. While the young woman sat on the sofa, Soma asked the others if they had heard what she had said, but they all denied it, claiming her voice had been too low for anyone to understand. Soma breathed a sigh of relief when he realized that no one in the kingdom had heard what Tomo had said. As everything was being broadcast publicly, he explained to those present that what he was about to reveal must be kept absolutely secret, as it could shake the entire kingdom. He then explained that Tomo could not only speak to animals, but also communicate with demons. Liz was deeply surprised and said it must be a mistake, as the demons spoke a language completely different from that of all other races, and that no one alive could decipher it except members of their own guild. Soma replied that precisely for this reason, Tomo was probably one of the most important people in the entire country, perhaps even more so than himself. Liz asked Tomo how she had discovered this ability, and the young woman explained that some time ago, while enjoying herself in the forest, she heard strange sounds and went to investigate. To her horror, she found a short, dog-headed demon looking directly at her. Frightened, she began to scream for help, but the demon ordered her to be quiet in its own language, and she understood perfectly, becoming even more frightened. The demon, surprised, asked if she understood what he was saying, and she confirmed it. Shortly after, noises approached, and the demon ordered her to flee immediately, warning that if the others saw her, they would kill her. That was the last moment she saw him, as she ran away without looking back. Liz then asked Soma if he intended to seek some kind of reconciliation between humans and demons, stating that such a thing was practically impossible, since the demons had killed countless humans. Soma replied that humans had also killed countless demons, and suggested that perhaps the whole war was the result of a profound misunderstanding caused by the fact that neither side could communicate with the other. Liz reflected and acknowledged that he might be right. Soma ordered Ark to immediately provide royal-level security for Tomo, ensuring her protection. The minister, however, reasoned that this would draw too much attention, as it would be strange for a poor young woman like Tomo to be constantly accompanied by royal guards. Soma admitted the minister was right and began to consider alternatives. The minister suggested that Soma adopt Tomo as his daughter, which would justify her protection, but quickly remembered that he would have to marry first to be able to adopt her. Soma then suggested that Liz's father adopt her, which would make it natural for her to have constant royal protection. Tomo, however, interrupted to say that he already had family living in the refugee camp and that he would not abandon them. Soma smiled and explained that, after being adopted, her parents would become relatives of the king and live in the castle with her. Tomo reacted happily and thanked everyone for what they were doing for her. Later, while Soma was in Liz's room, she received news that Poncho had returned from his mission. He went to meet him accompanied by Liz. They sat down, and Poncho thanked Soma for allowing him to use his royal wyvern, which made gathering supplies much faster and more efficient. Then, Poncho introduced the new ingredient he had brought, leaving everyone horrified: a slime monster. Despite his initial reaction of revulsion, Poncho donned an apron, spread the slime on the counter, cut it into thin, noodle-like strips, and cooked it with water, salt, vegetables, and broth. The result didn't look appetizing to the others, but Soma commented that the dish reminded him of ramen from his world, sat down, and tried it. Surprised by the similar flavor, he began eating enthusiastically. Gradually, others tried it too and began to like it. The broadcast of that event ended successfully, and soon all the taverns and restaurants in the region began serving the dishes presented, even creating new recipe combinations. Shortly thereafter, a guard summoned Soma to the throne room, informing him that the Prime Minister requested an audience. Upon arriving, he found Kaz and the minister bowing before him. Soma asked them to rise and state their wishes. The Prime Minister declared that he believed it was time to follow the former king's example and step down to make way for new ideas and methods different from the traditional ones, which were failing. Surprised, Soma asked who would take over, emphasizing the need for someone as wise and competent as himself. The minister reassured him, saying that he had trained Kaz as his apprentice and that he was ready to take over, with great capacity to do excellent work in the future. Soma analyzed Kaz and realized that he might indeed be the ideal candidate. He accepted the resignation and appointed Kaz as the new prime minister. Kaz thanked him and advised Soma to take a day off, warning that overwork could lead to burnout and, consequently, reduce the productivity of everyone around him. Initially reluctant, Soma eventually agreed and arranged a meeting with Liz, escorted by Aisha. Liz was surprised by his decision and asked if he was okay. Soma replied that he was, and that he just wanted to relax. Liz suggested they go undercover, handing him military school uniforms while she donned one for herself. The three then went into town and, after wandering around for a while, decided to visit Juna at her cafe. They sat in a booth to have a snack and talk about the kingdom when they heard a loud argument at the next table, where a fox girl named Keat and a red-haired boy named Hal were sitting. The conversation revealed that Hal distrusted the new king, being young and seemingly inexperienced, and saw no reason to follow him. Keat countered by saying that the king demonstrated intelligence and strategic skill, but Hal, eager for glory on the battlefield, said he intended to ally himself with the Duke of Carmen, who was in rebellion against the king. Keat was horrified, but Hal insisted. At that moment, Soma approached and asked why Hal disliked the new king. Hal, not knowing who he was, reacted rudely, while Keat, recognizing him, became nervous. They soon moved to the table to talk, but Hal maintained his hostile stance until Aisha intervened, immobilizing him. Soma asked her to release him, and, looking at Hal, asked if he still didn't recognize him. Realizing he was speaking to the king, Hal changed his tone. Soma said she wouldn't force him to stay, and that he was free to follow his path, including to the Duke of Carmen's side. However, she made a point of reminding him that if that happened, he would end up facing Keat on the battlefield, and that if she were injured, he wouldn't be allowed to protect her. Even if Keat were about to die and Hal had the chance to save her, he wouldn't be allowed by his own army to do so, and that would be considered treason. Hal remained silent, reflecting for a long time, until he decided he didn't want to go to the opposite side and end up fighting Soma or Keat. Soma was pleased to hear this, thanked her, and took his leave. The next day, he sat down for tea with Liz and told her he was improving his shadow magic, being able to control 4 inanimate objects simultaneously. Before she could comment, he was summoned to the throne room, as the head of the prestigious House Magna had arrived to meet him and requested his presence. Soma immediately went to attend to them and found Hal, with several wounds on his face, along with Glaive and Keat, all with their heads bowed. As he sat on the throne, Glaive quickly apologized, saying he had no idea what Hal had said and had only learned later from Keat. He explained that he had already disciplined his son and asked Soma not to take too harsh measures against him. Glaive assured him that the Magna family gave Soma full support and would always stand by him under any circumstances. Soma thanked him for his loyalty and stated that he had no intention of punishing Hal, as Glaive seemed to have already been harsh enough with him. He added that he intended to include Keat as one of the mages in his royal guard and make Hal an officer in the royal army, so they could work closely and support each other. A few days later, most of the paperwork was completed, and the rest could be done using Soma's shadow magic, eliminating the need for additional manpower. He summoned everyone who had worked on processing the documents throughout the period, and when they were gathered, he gave a generous speech, declaring that they were the kingdom's true treasure and that, thanks to them, he could begin the next project, capable of ensuring the country's long-term survival and even solving the food shortage. Soma announced that everyone would have a full week off for their excellent work. He said he would like to reward them financially, but that the kingdom was short on resources. So instead, he allowed each person to take a bottle of the finest, full-bodied wine from the royal stock, which they could sell or drink as they wished. The group celebrated, thanked him, and hurried to the cellar. Liz then asked if it was wise to free up a whole week, since there was still much to do, but Soma replied that they could relax, as progress was excellent. He explained that he planned to create a port on the coast of a village, which would bring strategic advantage, increase trade, and transform the place into a market town, generating employment for many people. He explained that foreign ships would have to pay taxes and tolls to trade in the kingdom, reducing illegal trade, and that he would impose low taxes on ships carrying affordable food, helping to alleviate hunger. He explained to Liz that everything depended on the law of supply and demand, and that, at the moment, demand for food was extremely high while supply was practically nil. The next day, Soma, Liz, and Aisha headed to the small village where the construction would take place. Ark was already there, with tents set up for everyone. When asked if there were any problems with the project, Ark explained that many village elders were against the port's construction, citing an ancient legend that if anything were built in that area, the water gods would destroy everything by sending a giant water monster. Interested in hearing this, Soma asked to speak with the elders, and Ark took him to one of the houses, where they spoke with one of them. The elder repeated his warning that if the port were built, the water gods would take revenge and devastate the entire region. When asked when this had happened, he said it was during his grandfather's time, and that, according to legend, before the sea monster appeared, the ground shook with its footsteps, and soon after, it emerged from the sea, destroying everything in its path. Back at the castle, Soma called Kaz and Ark to discuss the matter. Kaz asked if he believed in the myth, but Soma replied that he didn't believe in sea monsters, but rather that legends always had some basis in truth. He said he would change the construction site and demarcate the area considered cursed by the villagers. He explained that the monster could actually be a tsunami, and that the tremors felt were earthquakes. He concluded that the location was vulnerable to natural disasters, and that it wasn't worth the risk of building a port there. With the revised plan, construction began. Hal, exhausted from the physical labor, complained to Keat about the army's involvement in the road construction. Keat ordered him back to work and warned him not to call her by name, as she was technically his superior. He explained that the army's involvement was necessary because there were many roads to build and little available labor. At lunchtime, Hal sampled a burger prepared by Soma and was surprised to learn that the fresh vegetables were coming from a nearby village thanks to a newly built road. Keat explained that the new roads were helping to reduce food prices by increasing supply, which made Hal recognize the king's strategic vision. Soon after, Soma appeared accompanied by Liz, surprising them both. Hal stood to greet him, but Soma asked him not to be so formal and said he was happy to have someone his own age to talk to freely. As they walked along the new roads, Soma showed Liz how they were constructed, explained the materials used, introduced the streetlights powered by luminous moss, and talked about the protective trees planted to temporarily keep wild animals away from the village. Suddenly, a messenger bird interrupted their conversation and delivered a letter to Aisha. In the message, her father informed her of a devastating landslide that had swallowed half the village, leaving many people missing. Aisha was visibly shaken and called out to Soma, who remained calm and treated the situation rationally. He immediately ordered Keat to mobilize a group, including herself, to form the first rescue team that would go with him to the Dark Elf village. He briefly comforted Aisha and told her that instead of crying, she should prepare to accompany them, as they were all foreigners in the region, and would need someone to guide them. He then urged Liz to quickly go to the palace, gather another rescue team, and request that Hakia send relief supplies to the Dark Elves. Soma asked Aisha how long it would take them to reach the village, and she replied that it would take 2 days of ordinary military marching. He worried about the time, explaining that if they let 3 days pass between the disaster and the arrival of rescue, the death toll would increase dramatically. As if in answer to his thoughts, one of the special rhinos from the entourage ran past, and Soma had the idea of using them to transport the rescue team to the village, while he would follow in the royal carriage. They arrived at the village late in the afternoon, and Aisha's father began to greet the king before introducing himself as Woden. Soma asked for formalities to be postponed and asked for a situation report. Woden reported that the landslide had claimed the lives of 100 people, and that 40 were still missing. Soma ordered a list of the names of the missing, each one to be crossed off as they were found. He also asked for someone to keep watch on the mountain for any signs of another landslide. Aisha volunteered, and her father agreed, as she knew the forest like no one else. Afterward, Soma assembled the search and rescue team, encouraging them to put their road building skills to use, as they would have to dig through the earth to find the people. During the digging, he suddenly stopped and ran to a fallen log, claiming to hear voices, though Hal noticed nothing. When Hal dug into the spot, he was shocked to find a human hand. He removed the log, freeing the trapped person. Hal was amazed at Soma's precision, and Soma produced a small wooden mouse designed to find people trapped in places too tight for the team to access. Soma controlled these rats with magic, sharing his consciousness with them, just as he did with the pens and the training dummy. In the end, all the residents were found, although some had lost their lives. Woden thanked Soma for her quick intervention. At that moment, one of Woden's daughters entered, saying that the princess had arrived with the second rescue team. However, a man crying in a corner said it was too late. Soma explained that although they were late to save those who died, they could still treat the injured and rebuild the destroyed buildings. The man retorted that none of this would bring back the dead, but Woden told him to be quiet and explained that it was his younger brother, Rob, who had lost his wife in the disaster, and whose only daughter was in critical condition. Rob lamented bitterly, saying he had dedicatedly protected the forest and could not understand how she could have killed his wife. Woden consoled him and told him to grieve without blaming anyone. Later, Aisha told Soma that Rob had been one of those who opposed the tree thinning he had previously proposed and questioned whether this might have contributed to the landslide. Soma replied that the disaster was simply the result of bad luck combined with the frequent rainfall. Upon returning to the palace, Liz apologized for not being able to help, but Soma said he felt even more useless, as he should have planned for such disasters in advance. He also admitted that he had focused too much on solving the famine problem and had neglected other important matters. Days later, Juna visited Soma and found him surrounded by papers in bed. She commented that Liz was worried about his unhealthy sleeping habits. Soma explained that his mind was occupied with many things. Juna sat beside him, urged him to lie down, and placed her hand on his forehead, stroking him gently. She said she understood if he didn't want to appear weak in front of the princess, but that that he could call her whenever he felt exhausted. To his surprise, Soma was already sound asleep, and she smiled, singing softly to him. Meanwhile, the leaders of the duchies discussed among themselves. The lion-headed duke named Carmen advocated overthrowing Soma, claiming he was unfit to rule. Duchess Excel appeared confused, highlighting everything Soma had done for the kingdom. But Carmen argued that he had been neglecting important matters and dismissing loyal leaders in the name of fighting corruption. Carmen didn't want to rule, only to reinstate the former king out of loyalty. Duke Castor also seemed willing to rebel, calling for war before Soma gained everyone's favor. Excel warned that other kingdoms, like Amgonia, might use the rebellion as an excuse to attack. But Castor said Amgonia was offering reinforcements against Soma. Excel didn't believe the offer, stating that they had likely made the same proposal to Soma to create confusion and attack Elfrieden while his troops were occupied. At that moment, Carla, Castor's daughter, entered and declared that if her father fought against Soma, she would fight alongside him, regardless of the consequences. Gaius, the cunning ruler of Amgonia, rejoiced when he learned that Carmen had accepted his proposal to fight Soma, calling him an old fool for planning to send reinforcements to both sides, creating chaos. Just as Excel had suspected, Prince Julius supported his father's plan, but Princess Rora opposed it, only admitting to envying Elfrieden's prosperity. At the palace, Soma consulted Hakia about a plan to use military force to protect the kingdom. Although he was against cruel measures, his grandfather's last words echoed in his mind, and he resolved to protect those he now considered family. He firmly ordered the plan of subjugation to begin. Meanwhile, Gaius ordered his army to invade Elfrieden's territory, targeting the city of Altamira, believing Soma to be occupied with the dukes. He declared it was time to reclaim lands lost 50 years ago, but was interrupted by Minister Colbert, who warned him that starting a war would lead the people to starvation. Gaius ignored the warning, assaulted the minister, and refused to acknowledge that they were bound by a treaty to the Humanity Accord. Upon leaving wounded, Colbert encountered Princess Rora, who told him she planned to flee, and urged him to be prepared in case the situation got out of hand. Meanwhile, Soma summoned Liz to ask for a special favor. He video communicated with the three dukes, and, after their introductions, declared that if they continued to rebel, he would be forced to recognize them as traitors. Excel asked what his intentions were regarding the duchies, and Soma stated that he simply wanted to unify the armies under his command, with no intention of harming them individually. Castor opposed Soma's proposal, fearing that unifying the armies could open the door to corruption. Soma replied that uniting forces would greatly increase the chances of victory against neighboring enemies like Amadonia, and assured him that he would not allow corruption to take root under his rule. He added that if he failed and became a corrupt king, he authorized Castor to personally take his life. At the end of the discussion, Lady Excel declared loyalty to Soma and placed her entire army under his command. But Castor and Carmen maintained their positions. They claimed that the former king had not consulted them before passing the throne to Soma. Castor stated that he would not ally with Carmen and preferred to remain neutral. Carmen, when she spoke, said she remained firm in her decision because of her pride as a warrior. After a heated exchange, Soma demanded that Carmen and Castor agree that if either of them were defeated, their men would swear allegiance to the victor. At that moment, Liz cut her hair in front of the dukes, demonstrating her determination to fight alongside Soma. Juna appeared beside Excel, and Soma thanked her for being the reason the Duchess supported him. Liz also assured him that he had the full support of his other allies. On the day of the battle, Gaius shouted a war cry to launch the surprise invasion of Elfrieden. He arrived with his army at Altamira and ordered one of the city's submissive lords to open the gates. The man asked for more time, explaining that the local military force was divided between those who supported Gaius and others who would not hesitate to kill him. Julius advised his father to deceive the guard, promising he would not harm any local soldiers if the gates were opened. Gaius, however, planned to kill him as soon as this happened. Meanwhile, Soma had already built a fortress at the kingdom's entrance with the help of Keith's earth magic and the laborers' efforts. The enemy army attempted to breach the walls, trading bows and arrows for large cannons. The gunfire began to cause damage, and Hal urged Keith to use his magic to counter the attacks, but she replied that she had already used all her power in building the wall. At that moment, a dark elf named Sir appeared and fired an arrow that split one of the cannonballs in half. He thanked Hal for saving his daughter during the landslide disaster, though he was angered to learn that the girl claimed to want to become like him. Inside the walls, Ark ordered the royal army to advance only against the cannons, ignoring the enemy soldiers. The strategy worked. Upon learning of this, Carmen remained calm and told the generals that the cannons had failed, but that he had a better strategy, as he had 40,000 soldiers to Soma's only 10,000. He planned to lure Soma to his army, believing the king was not present in the city, given the defensive posture of his troops. As Carmen prepared his maneuver, Gaius believed he was about to conquer Altamira. However, war cries surprised his troops. Lord Weiss returned terrified, saying he had been unable to convince the most aggressive part of the army to calm down. He offered Gaius a payment in gold dust in exchange for postponing the attack until the next day, when he would have convinced the entire army to support him. Julius persuaded his father to accept. In truth, Weiss was not a traitor to Elfrieden, but was secretly in league with Excel. The Duchess acknowledged that paying gold to buy time was a strategy that followed Soma's plan, but warned that if the king did not appear by noon, all would be lost. At dawn, Carmen continued trying to destroy the fortress. Keat realized that the enemy had changed formation, favoring direct combat, which was advantageous for the local forces. Gaius, however, back at the site of the agreement with Weiss, saw the conditions met and ordered the attack. On the battlefield, a group of wyverns advanced rapidly toward the fortress, leading Hal to believe they were reinforcements for Carmen. The night before, in Red City, Castor's right-hand man informed him that the city was evacuated and that air forces from other lands wanted to join him. But Castor refused, not wanting to share the glory of his rebellion. Despite this, he began to view Soma more positively, though it was too late to change sides. He worried that Soma might surprise him with an unexpected maneuver. During their conversation, Carla rushed in, saying that Soma's forces had been spotted, but there was only one ship. At that moment, Soma requested a call with Castor as the ship was pulled toward the castle. Soon, it began firing at the fortress, impressing Castor with the boldness of its strategy. Soma offered him the chance to join the winning side, but Castor refused to avoid damaging his reputation. Carla led the air force to attack the ship, intending to capture Soma alive, avoiding hitting anything that could harm Princess Liz. They managed to silence the cannons, but upon boarding the ship, they discovered there were no enemy soldiers, only mechanical hands controlling the weapons. Castor realized he had been tricked. The ship was merely a diversion, and Soma had infiltrated the castle using secret passages found on the city maps. Castor said he would entrust the leadership of his air force to the loyal Talman if defeated. Soma gave him one last chance to surrender, but he drew his sword and declared that true men do not retreat. Aisha advanced, urging Soma to step aside, but Castor provoked him into a direct fight. With a swift blow, Aisha clashed her sword against his. He dodged and called her a child, but she revealed decades of experience. With a powerful strike, she threw him against the wall, surprising him with her strength. Aisha declared she didn't mind being called a fool as long as she had the strength to protect Soma. Castor began to wonder what kind of man deserved such loyalty. At that moment, Liz appeared unexpectedly and used her magic to trap him in a block of ice. Aisha shattered the ice with her sword and knocked Castor to the ground. The princess mourned him, but Castor asserted that he had fought honorably and, even in defeat, had preserved his pride. Castor asked Liz if Soma was a good king, and she replied that he was so kind to her that she was willing to fight her own father for him. Just then, the sound of the battleship's explosion echoed, and Liz immediately placed a slave collar around Castor's neck, explaining that if the collar detected any intention of harming his master, which in this case was Soma, it would tighten until his head rolled. Shortly afterward, Carla entered the compound and was horrified to see her father lying on the ground wearing a slave collar. She drew her sword, but Liz warned her about the collar and said that if she did anything against Soma, her father would pay with his life. Soma kept his end of the bargain and appointed Tolman a temporary general of the Air Force, but under the command of the Forbidden Army. Tolman agreed to serve, though he was curious about the fate of the Duke and his daughter. Soma replied that he would review the matter after the war, but until then, Tolman was to rally the troops and announce that they were under new command before they headed to the Duchy of Carmen. On the way back, Liz began to speak highly of Carla, describing her as a good and dedicated person, even hinting that, beneath the crude armor, she might have an attractive body. Soma understood the intention, realizing that Liz wanted him to spare Carla and take her as a concubine, but he was worried about losing the people's trust if he ignored her crime of rebellion. Carla supported Soma on this point, telling Liz that she did not want her life spared, as he had sent numerous letters trying to convince them to change their minds. all of which had been rejected. At Elfriden Fortress, Keat and Hal observed the approaching air force, and Keat immediately realized that Soma had won the battle against Castor. Tolman ordered them to attack Carmen's castle, avoiding residential areas. Soma and Hal congratulated themselves on successfully executing the plan, though both acknowledged the difficulties they faced. Carla, observing the conversation, was surprised by Hal's informality when speaking to the king, and Liz explained that Soma didn't care. Meanwhile, Carmen's generals reported the damage caused by the airstrikes and asked what measures they should take against the force that had betrayed them. Upon learning that Soma had complete control of the heavens, Carmen realized that her people were practically hostage and acknowledged that she had lost to Soma. The generals, however, disagreed and suggested using the civilians as human shields, sheltering within the castle. Carmen was shocked by the cruelty of the men she had been protecting and, in an unexpected act, ordered them to be collared so they would have to beg Soma for their lives. He also ordered his right-hand man to place a collar around his own neck and announce his total surrender. News that a peace flag had been raised in Randall quickly reached Soma, surprising his followers with how quickly the war had ended. Carmen was seen holding an expensive bottle of wine, a wedding gift from an allied king, which he intended to drink on the day Liz was married. However, he now knew he might be captured and never see that day. His reflection was interrupted by Beowulf, who arrived bearing the good news that Soma would not invade the city, only taking Carmen's army to another distant location. Satisfied, Carmen raised the bottle in honor of Soma and Liz. Carla, confused by the events, asked Soma and Liz for an explanation. They told her that everything had been planned by Carmen himself. Soma revealed that he never intended to fight against the duchies, and that, initially, the only one who supported him was the Duchess, through her granddaughter's connection to him. Despite her lack of public support, Carmen had her own plans to expose and deal with the corrupt officers in her army, something that would benefit the entire kingdom. Soma apologized to Carla, explaining that her father had not been informed to prevent a leak from ruining Carmen's sacrifice. Carla understood when she learned that her father had risked his life to make everything work. Meanwhile, in Altamira, Gaius and Julius planned to punish Weiss, but they saw someone climbing the wall. Gaius was surprised to recognize Duchess Excel, and soon realized that she had likely been in contact with Soma all along. Julius realized they had been deceived and told his father they must retreat immediately. Excel then created a portal that broadcast the image of Soma, announcing that he had won the civil war and now controlled all the armed forces. He exposed Gaius for exploiting the conflict to try to conquer Altamira and declared war, claiming that the Forbidden Army was marching on Amadonia's capital, Vam, with the intention of destroying it. The Princess of Amadonia was informed that her father's army had been ambushed on its way to defend the city, losing half its men. Julius and Gaius managed to recruit soldiers from nearby villages, but upon reaching the capital, they found Elfriden in control. With flags and banners flying everywhere, Gaius was devastated, believing the entire region of Leven had fallen. But Julius realized the castle was free of Elfriden banners and ordered the Forbidden Army driven out. Soma saw this as a chance for a direct confrontation and ordered the engagement. Ark positioned his troops in a special formation, and the battle began with intensity. During the fighting, Keat used his magic to trap Amadonian soldiers in an earthen barrier, while Hal threw a flaming spear. Midway through the fighting, Soma confided to Carla that if the battle became too bloody, he might have to swallow his pride and beg for mercy to spare his men. He also admitted that lately, he had been acting more like a king. Despite feeling like a coward for detesting the idea of bloodshed, he decided he needed to stop acting as a temporary ruler and fully assume the role of full king. On the battlefield, Gaius realized the error of sending weary soldiers to war and ordered Julius to flee, admitting defeat. Reluctant to leave his father, Julius eventually retreated with a group of men. Soma was informed that Gaius was advancing against him with a smaller group of elite fighters. He told Carla that he would transfer ownership of the slave collar to Liz, and that, if anything happened to her, she would be the next ruler of the kingdom. Carla rejected this idea, saying she could defeat Gaius if he ordered it. Soma gave the order, and she departed immediately. Ark spotted the approaching army and aimed his spear at Gaius, but upon closer inspection, he realized he had been tricked and that it was merely a double. Carla, on the other hand, quickly spotted Gaius and launched the initial attack. he easily defended himself, leaving them at a stalemate, as they were both equally strong. Suddenly, the puppet controlled by Soma appeared out of nowhere and struck Gaius, who found it curious, as he couldn't understand how a mere puppet could defeat him. At that moment, Soma ordered Carla to step aside, and when Gaius approached, he manipulated the puppet to block the attack with a blow, while also instructing Carla to set the puppet on fire. There was a loud explosion as Gaius was engulfed in flames, and Soma rushed to check on Carla, but she was irritated that he was on the battlefield, risking death and causing suffering to Lies. Surprisingly, Gaius emerged from the fire and continued advancing on Soma, even in his weakened state. As he approached, several arrows were fired at him, but nothing prevented him from throwing his sword at Soma. Luckily, the blade landed just inches from him and missed him, and Gaius finally gave up, falling to the ground dead. Soma showed respect for the bravery of Gaius and his warriors, stating that their stories should be recorded in the history books. Princess Rora received the sad news of her father's death and, alone, shed a few tears in mourning for the old fool. The next day, Lies learned that Soma had been planning to take Amadonia for some time, and was surprised to learn that he had managed to keep casualties at the border to a minimum. Soma explained that Hakuya advised him not to evacuate the area's residents, as this would easily give away his next move to the enemy. Instead, he planned a fake attack with fire monsters to scare the villagers and force them to leave. Without a formal evacuation, Ark reported that Rora had left the city with the finance minister and some officials, while Julius departed with soldiers heading west. Soma asked some bureaucrats to lure the officials back, as they were important to Amadonia's development. Soon after, Poncho reported that Amadonia's treasury did not hold large food stocks, but it did have plenty of weapons. Soma ordered the weapons to be sold and food rationed until the situation stabilized. If still insufficient, supplies would need to be brought in from his own kingdom. Another official reported that the Amadonia soldiers were in high spirits, which would facilitate the conquest of other cities. However, Soma declared that he did not intend to capture more territories to avoid problems with the Empire, as he knew they would come after him for violating humanity's treaty by taking the capital Van by force. And this was because this treaty was an agreement created to unite humans against the demonic kingdom. Since Amadonia was a signatory to this treaty, the Empire could take extreme measures to reclaim the city. Liz questioned why he hadn't signed the treaty knowing this, and Soma explained that the declaration contained a hidden clause that could weaken the Empire in the future. Since the war, there had been much hatred and tension against the Elfiden kingdom, and Art asked if Soma had any plans to alleviate this hostility. Coincidentally, Soma summoned Juna, who appeared wearing an elegant naval uniform. He explained that he had called her to carry out the next phase of his plan, a project called Lorelei. Soon, a newscaster appeared on the broadcast, saying she would bring daily updates on events in the Elfiden kingdom and surrounding areas. It then appeared that Soma had prepared an entertainment program, as Aisha appeared in a beautiful dress, although she felt uncomfortable. When Soma appeared with her on screen, the Amadonians were surprised to see such a young man defeat Gaius. Soma announced that they would hold Elfiden's first musical concert and introduced a young singer. After her song, Juna took the stage to perform. While Juna was singing, Soma pulled Aisha aside to tell her he had invited a surprise guest to sing later and wanted her to ensure his safety. Aisha firmly stated that she would protect him with her life, which made Soma look away awkwardly. Juna's performance was well received by the audience, and then Soma introduced his surprise guest, Lieutenant General Margarita of Amadonia, who would sing the Amadonian national anthem. The audience was shocked, and there was a brief silence, but soon everyone stood and paid respects during the performance. When she finished, Margarita told Soma that he could cut off her head, but he replied that there was no reason to. She didn't believe him, as the Amadonian anthem was about to reclaim lands supposedly stolen by Elfiden. Still, Soma asserted that his kingdom had no laws against foreign anthems, and that a good country was one where everyone could sing whatever they wanted. Meanwhile, Soma's prediction about the Empire was about to come true. At the head of the Treaty of Humanity was the Great Chaos Empire, ruled by a beautiful and gentle woman named Maria, known as the Saint of the Empire. His sister Jean announced that she would travel to the conquered city of Van to negotiate with Soma for the return of the territory and preserve imperial prestige. After the recent conquests, Soma returned to the routine of dealing with a large volume of paperwork and realized the extra burden he carried after taking over Van. The good news was that the city's people were motivated to recover after years years of oppression. Rora realized that, since power was taken from her father, the people felt freer than ever, and would not give her brother a chance to claim the throne. Attributing this change to Soma, who had reduced taxes and increased the circulation of goods. Still, she planned to make him pay for what he had done to the capital and her family. Soma was informed that an army was approaching and asked to be updated on any developments. At that moment, Poncho arrived bearing a lily plant with hallucinogenic effects, but whose bulb was a highly valuable food. To harvest the roots, they had to use orangutans, animals addicted to the plant's effects. Soma asked if there were orangutans in Emadonia, and Poncho confirmed, saying he had already contacted Tomo to negotiate a deal, offering barrels of the herb in exchange for the animals' help with the harvest. After organizing everything, Poncho prepared a stew with the roots and distributed it to the locals, allowing them to take portions home. Later, Soma, Luna, and Tomo went to the market, with Soma wearing a hat to hide his identity. When Tomo walked away to shop, Luna held his arm, assuring him he was safe with her. She suggested buying something for Soma's adoptive sister, and when they arrived at the store, he asked the girl to choose whatever she wanted. Luna accompanied her and selected some pretty dresses, while Soma chose a pair of ugly shoes. The minister then used a military analogy to say that men and women negotiated differently, and Soma took the hint, letting Luna choose everything. Soma asked why he used a military analogy, and Tomo replied that he'd been dealing with a charming yet cunning little devil lately, referring to the princess of Emadonia. After shopping, Tomo appeared wearing a pretty dress and carrying more clothes than she could handle. She was radiant and grateful to her older brother for the gift, even though she thought the shoes were quite ugly. Soma also gave Luna a ladybug-shaped hair clip, and she blushed as she thanked him. Luna suggested he buy gifts for Liz and the others, and he explained that he'd already bought something for everyone. He asked her to drop the formalities and call him by name. They stopped at one of the stalls for a quick bite to eat, and Tobo fell asleep on Soma's lap. A few minutes later, a newscaster announced that the weather would be sunny in both Elfriden and Van, perfect for everyone to dry their clothes. Suddenly, a female voice behind them commented that it was impressive to see gem transmission being used in such an innovative way, and they turned to find Jean Euphoria, commander of the Empire's military forces, realizing that her guards had overpowered his. Soma declared that she must have been quite bold to so casually enter his territory. Luna steps forward to protect him, but Jean says she means no harm and has only come to confirm whether all the rumors she'd heard about him were true. She claims she heard Soma was a wise ruler who managed to turn around the economic situation of a bankrupt kingdom, creating a lasting solution to food shortages by using creative means to prepare dishes that people normally rejected. She then adds that she'd also heard he was an incorrigible womanizer who, despite being engaged to the former king's daughter, gathered the most beautiful women in the kingdom to form a royal harem. Luna isn't surprised and even laughs, having heard the same rumor before, while Soma is speechless at his apparent reputation. Jean says that if the rumors were false, her plan wouldn't work, as she intended to use her beautiful sister to convince him to liberate the land of Emadonia, counting on his supposed weakness for beautiful women. Soma is surprised that Jean would be willing to involve someone as respected as her sister, known as the Saint of the Empire, in something like this. However, Jean states that her sister dislikes this title, as she considers her to be no saint. But Maria does not mind keeping it if it has some desirable effect on young people like Soma. Upon hearing this, Luna invents a title for herself singer and asks him what he thinks. After a while, Jean comments that Soma is a fun-loving king who gets along well with his officers, which is proof enough that his kingdom is stable. She explains that her sister Maria is called a saint for the same reason, though she keeps everyone at a respectful distance. Maria is deeply committed to her duties and treats everyone equally, which is why she gets involved in the call for Amadonia's liberation, as she would have nothing to personally gain by helping them. Jean thinks gem transmission is an incredible idea and asks Soma for permission to implement something similar in his country. She asks how he managed to think of such an innovative use for this technology, and he replies that in the world he came from, something like that was quite common. Immediately, Jean bows and apologizes on behalf of the Empire for having summoned him from his world. Soma says he always knew the Empire had no need for a hero, and that he had only been called to serve as a human sacrifice in Elfriden's name. The kingdom of Elfriden was not a signatory to the Humanity Accord, but it still benefited from it. However, due to the declining economy, it couldn't contribute as much as neighboring kingdoms, so they decided to summon a hero as an offering to the demons just to appear serious. Jean claims that no one expected summoning a hero to work, or that Elfriden's situation would improve, but Soma proved otherwise. Now, all he wants is to protect the family he built and hopes Jean accepts his authority over Amadonia. She replies that she also has a family to protect, and he says they will have to negotiate to reach an agreement. Jean states that she hopes he will take it easy and leaves immediately, but the feeling is that such negotiations will not be easy. Upon returning to the castle, Toma excitedly shows off her new dress to the women, and Soma gives Aisha the lipstick he had bought for her. Aisha is thrilled with the gift and says she hopes to become more feminine for her beloved king. Liz watches the scene filled with envy, until Soma hands her a beautiful necklace that fits her perfectly. Seeing her family sharing joy and laughter, Soma strengthens her resolve to protect them at all costs. At this point, the season comes to an end.